Hi, I'm Jessica the Museum Guide, and today I'm at the Louvre in Paris, showing you 20 of the most famous must-see paintings here at the museum. The Louvre, the largest and most visited museum in the world, is really 3 museums in one. Yes, it has 3 wings, but it also has 3 major foci: design and architecture, antiquities, and paintings. Today we're focusing solely on the paintings and delving into 20 must-see canvases that span nearly 6 centuries across all 3 wings of the Louvre, starting all the way back in 1295. This video is for you if you're planning a trip to the Louvre or if you just want to appreciate great art from the comfort of your sofa. We'll see masterpieces by the heavy hitters of the Italian Renaissance, the Dutch Golden Age, and French neoclassicism, with a few oddities along the way. Now, if you're interested in an even more in-depth look at some of these paintings, be sure to watch my first 2 Louvre videos. The paintings currently on your screen are featured in those videos, and I give a more detailed analysis about them there. If you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. Check out the description for ways that you can support the museum guide and how you can book tours with me in London. Just a few notes about the structure of today's tour. I've organized the paintings chronologically, so there's no attempt to say which one I think is best, although that might shine through. Let me know in the comment section if I've chosen your favorite works or if you learned about a new piece. I'd love to know. For now, let's get started. We're going to spend around 2.5 minutes on each painting, so allons-y. That means let's go. Let's start with a Byzantine painting, the oldest that we'll cover today. This is St. Francis of Assisi receiving the Stigmata by Giotto di Bondone. Byzantine means that it's a Greek Christian painting hailing from the former Eastern Roman Empire between the 4th and the 15th century. This one dates to around 1295. Byzantine art typically features static figures with no perspective or depth and a lot of gold leaf. It's really recognizable and very opulent. Now, I've chosen this painting because it's a good example of this style of art and its progression towards the Renaissance. Compared to other Byzantine paintings, Giotto's work features more emotion and interaction between the figures. Instead of St. Francis facing the viewer, he's more naturalistic, with an effort to make his clothing realistic and even 3-dimensional, which is a real difference from the very flat human figures of earlier medieval painting. The work depicts a flying Christ. He's a seraph here, which is unusual, delivering stigmata to St. Francis on Mount Alverno. Christ's own wounds are rays of light that pierce Francis's body, which is an inventive touch. St. Francis looks confused and maybe even scared. These are very human emotions that we can all relate to. While Giotto's flat background mountains are typical of Byzantine art, there is an attempt to add perspective in the facial features and the chiaroscuro, that's the sharp contrast of light and dark, that we'll see in a lot of the Renaissance and Baroque paintings on our tour today. The predella, that is, the bottom bits of the altarpiece, depicts 3 scenes from St. Francis's life, common in altarpieces in Assisi: the dream of Pope Innocent III, the approval of the Franciscan rule, and the sermon to the birds. This legendary work became part of the Louvre's collection during Napoleon's era of looting art from Italy, and that comes up on our tour a few times. Say what you want about him, Napoleon had good taste, but the controversies of how some of these pieces got to this museum linger to this day. Let's include a little Parisian history lesson into our tour with this 1449 altarpiece, The Crucifixion of the Parliament of Paris by André Dieppe, depicting the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, we can see the 3 Marys, the Virgin, Mary Magdalene, and Mary Salome, as well as St. John the Evangelist, and of course, their presence is biblically accurate. But there's also the presence of St. John the Baptist, who was beheaded before Jesus' death. Still, that's not too far-fetched and quite common. But here, we also see 3 very French saints: born centuries or even a millennium later. Ypres also moved the Crucifixion to Paris. On the left, we can see a view from the terrace of the Hôtel des Nesles over the Seine, the Louvre Fortress, and the Petit Bourbon Hotel. Here we have Saint Louis IX, who was the only king of France to be canonized. Here's Saint Denis, who we'll come back to, and Charlemagne, the 9th century Frankish king, Holy Roman Emperor, and Quebecois swear word. But I want to talk about this chap here, the beheaded one, holding his own head. Saint Denis was a bishop of Paris, then known as Lutetia, in the 3rd century, at a time when the city was under Roman rule. He came to Lutetia from Italy, and he's often credited with Christianizing France and its neighboring regions, along with his companions Rusticus and Eleutherius, one of whom is depicted on the right in a white shirt next to Saint Denis' executioner. He was beheaded for his beliefs and is legendarily said to have walked 6 miles carrying his own head. He placed his head on the exact spot where a new basilica should be built, which became known as, you guessed it, the Basilica of Saint Denis. Saint Denis then became the preferred burial place for French kings, but I've never actually been there, so let me know if you would be interested in a tour of that church, which is in a northern suburb of Paris. Here's a fun fact that I learned. He is the most famous of the cephalophore saints. That's a fancy term for saints who carry their own heads, and they are most commonly found in France. I also love the detail of the little terrier here at his feet. Remarkably, it's still in the original flamboyant Gothic frame, and I've known a few flamboyant Goths in my time. The most famous painting in the world, the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, painted between 1503 and 1506. It's called La Gioconda in Italian, and it depicts Lisa Ghiardini, the wife of Francesco del Giocondo. Da Vinci was meant to give this painting to his patron, but instead he brought it with him to France. That said, some people believe that the painting is actually of Leonardo himself in drag, or of his lover Salai, depicted as a woman. The painting is more famous than Leonardo's others for 2 main reasons: her enigmatic facial expression and the fact that it was stolen, which made headlines all over the world, and I'll touch on that in a moment. Let's start with her facial expressions. From some angles, she looks like she's smirking. From others, she's smiling, and from still others, her mouth is slightly downturned. It is impossible to determine her mood, and that bewitching facial expression lends to her popularity. However, the Mona Lisa shot to worldwide fame when the painting was stolen in 1911. It helped this become the most famous painting on earth, remixed and copied and parodied countless times. Be warned, you'll only have a few moments with the Mona Lisa here at the Louvre. The crowd control is very strict and the queues are long, but you can usually get through in about 15 minutes. You can try to come here first thing in the morning or be one of the last people in the gallery at closing time if you want a little bit more time with her. Just remember, there are some other truly moving works by Leonardo in this museum. 4 more to be exact, just a few steps away in the Grande Gallery. Make sure you make some time for them, especially the Virgin of the Rocks and the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. You'll encounter far fewer people and be able to stand much closer and marvel at the work of this genius. Here we have the Pastoral Concert. It's a legendary painting that has inspired every generation of artists since Titian painted it in 1509. Its most notable is the inspiration for both Manet and Monet's versions of Les Déjeuners sur l'herbe, Luncheon on the Grass. It's all about fantasy and storytelling at a time in history when most of the population could not read, so viewing a painting like this would be like going to the movies. Titian was a true master of creating richly colored fantasyscapes. His talent for depicting Greco-Roman myths, biblical stories, and whimsical portraits made him a key figure in the Venetian Renaissance, and he is known for his vibrant color palette, using paints at their full strength. He was a master of mannerism, which is a style of Renaissance painting that essentially means stylish style. In this piece, the two nude women dancing in the foreground of the painting are the musician's magical vision. They are the men's muses made flesh. With their robes and nudity, they represent ideal beauty and poetry. We can see the delightfully robust nude woman here, standing in contrapposto, that is, on one straight leg with the other bent, pouring water into a stone well, while the other woman turns away from us and plays a flute. The men are so caught up in the blissful music that their fantasies have manifested in front of them. At first glance, it's a beautiful scene, and to our eyes, quite chaste, but it is layered with sexual innuendo that the Impressionists will make even more pronounced. I mean, what happens next? Did I mention that this shares a wall with the Mona Lisa? It does. She's just on the other side of this partition. If you like Titian's bold, colorful style, be sure to check out some of his other paintings here at the Louvre, including my favorite, Woman with a Mirror, or Woman at Her Toilet, which meant her dressing table. There are 8 Raphael paintings in the Louvre, depicting the sweeping biblical scenes and the Madonna and child images that he's most known for, and I almost chose this one, Saint Michael vanquishing the devil, instead, which of course you should also come to admire. However, I wanted to show off something a little bit different by the high Renaissance master with this portrait, widely considered to be one of the most important of the entire Renaissance period. This is the portrait of Baldassare Castiglione, a diplomat and humanist who was close friends with Raphael. He really was a true Renaissance gentleman. Both men were part of the courtly circle in Urbino and worked together on projects such as delivering a portrait to Henry VII of England. Raphael painted it and Castiglione delivered it in person. Let's focus on what makes this such a successful portrait and why it is such a great representation of Raphael's skill. We see Castiglione wearing a dark doublet trimmed with squirrel fur and ribbon. I always tell people to look closely at Renaissance painting for the amount of fur on display. It will tell you a lot about the wealth that a subject is trying to portray. But it is his expression that is truly arresting. Raphael has imbued him with sensitivity and quiet strength at the same time, with his softly contoured clothing and his rounded beard. He embodies sprezzatura. That's a term that Castiglione coined in his book of the Courtier. It translates roughly to nonchalant mastery. I love that. An ideal of effortless grace befitting a man of culture, a concept that was later adopted by the English playwrights Ben Jonson and Shakespeare. The portrait's composition has led some art historians to wonder if it is an homage to the Mona Lisa, but we know one thing for certain. It has inspired countless other artists. Rembrandt referenced the composition in several of his self-portraits, which I go into depth about in my second National Gallery video, and copies have been made by Peter Paul Rubens and Matisse, to name just a few. Now we're off to the Richelieu wing. Let's talk about Anne of Cleves, with this Hans Holbein the Younger portrait unexpectedly held here and not in England. This portrait, painted in 1538, is of the 23-year-old Anne, presented to Henry VIII, then 48, as he was looking for his 4th wife. He found the image favorable and agreed to marry her, which was a lot of responsibility for the legendary portraitist Holbein. It's likely a myth that Holbein made her look more beautiful on canvas than in person. This seems to date to the 17th century, when criticizing Anne's clothing and manners became fashionable, and that's when she gained the nickname the Flanders Mare. It wasn't during her lifetime. Holbein is considered the finest portrait artist of the Northern Renaissance, and he knew how to capture someone in a flattering but realistic way, so the truth is likely more simple. Henry just didn't fancy her in person, and they had zero chemistry. He said, "She is nothing so fair as she hath been reported." But he had already agreed to marry her at a time when an alliance with her family against the French was smart. Henry is said to have been so angry at Holbein for this portrait that the artist almost lost his head, but again, this might have been exaggerated for effect. But just a year later, the alliance with the House of Cleves was no longer relevant, but pulling out of the contract would have been politically disastrous. Besides, he may have already spotted the teenage Catherine Howard. So Henry and Anne of Cleves were only married for 6 months, and it was never consummated. Anne was a good sport about giving Henry an annulment, and she was rewarded by being made the king's honorary sister and given a special allowance and property in Kent. Anne would go on to outlive Henry and his next 2 wives. The Swiss-German Holbein fell out of favour with the court, not because of this painting, but because his patron, Thomas Cromwell, lost his head for his poor matchmaking skills. Holbein spent the last few years of his life working on private commissions before passing away at age 45, likely from the plague. If you found this bit of Tudor history interesting and you'd like to learn more, watch my videos on the National Portrait Gallery's Tudor collection. I've linked them just above. Okay, once you've seen the Mona Lisa, do something that most people do not do. Turn around. That's right. If you swivel just 180 degrees, you'll see a monumental canvas of epic proportions depicting the biblical tale of Jesus turning water into wine. It's the largest painting in the Louvre, which is really saying something compared to some that we'll see a bit later on. This is one of Paolo Veronese's most accomplished works, and it's considered a marvel of the high Renaissance and Mannerist styles. Veronese combines the biblical scene with Greek and Roman architecture, as well as contemporary Renaissance touches. In the painting, we can see the water into wine miracle of Jesus' time, but with the grandeur of a 16th century Venetian banquet, where each dish was dripping with opulence and meant to symbolize wealth and power. The figures in the painting are a who's who of European and Ottoman dignitaries, including statesmen and royals like Ottoman Emperor Suleiman the Great, Queen Mary I of England, and Eleanor of Austria. Veronese includes himself and his fellow Venetian painters in the painting as well. He's the musician in the white tunic, while Tintoretto, Titian, we just saw his work, and Bassano all play instruments. Another fascinating detail is the way that Jesus and Mary are depicted at the center of the wedding table. The newlyweds are actually all the way over here. And even though the meal is complete and the guests are starting in on dessert, we can see a server still carving some roasted lamb. Coincidence? No, there are no coincidences in Renaissance paintings. Just look at the way that the carver's knife is positioned above Jesus' head, reminding us of his fate as a sacrificial lamb. Stand here and take in all the details. You'll be amazed. There are quite a few other Veronese works in this room, so be sure to have a look at the raising of Jairus' daughter, the crucifixion of Jesus, and the supper at Emmaus, which are all very serious pieces. But despite its serious ambiance and important collection, there are also some silly and strange pieces here at the Louvre. And these so-called composite portraits by Giuseppe Arcimboldo have been delighting visitors for centuries. From a distance, they appear as simple heads and faces, but when you get closer, you can see that they are actually made from different foliage, fruits, and vegetables, each representing the 4 seasons, although here we only have on display autumn and winter. Arcimboldo was a master of mannerism, but he takes the lurid and dramatic colors and themes even further, inspired by a contemporary explosion of interest in the natural world and the Wunderkammers, or cabinets of curiosity, that were exploding in popularity across the continent. His talent was greatly admired by the Habsburg court, and more importantly by the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II, who snapped him up and moved him first to Prague and then to Vienna, where he spent much of his career entertaining the elite with his alternative portraits. While these are meant to be viewed right side up, Arcimboldo did also pioneer a style of topsy-turvy palindrome heads that can be viewed both upside down and right side up. For us, this is quite a familiar gag, but for the 16th century, this was downright groundbreaking. This set was produced between 1563 and 1573 for Emperor Maximilian, and they were accompanied by a poem by Battista Fonteo that explained their allegorical meaning. Of the original set, only winter and summer survive, and they are now in the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna. Here in the Louvre, we can see the copies created by Arcimboldo as a gift for the emperor to send to Augustus of Saxony. Though not on display when I was here, springtime is represented by flowers and greenery, while summer is a bounty of fresh fruits and vegetables wearing a straw jacket. Note the inclusion of the corn and eggplant or aubergine, which were recent imports from the New World. Autumn is a man with autumnal fruits and veggies for a face, while winter is a gnarled old man made of wood and barren branches. These are visual puzzles laden with symbolism, and viewers would have seen them as artistic jokes and games. While he was undoubtedly well paid, one does have to wonder if Arcimboldo grew tired of being pigeonholed into this one style, which he remained known for until his death. Now here's another piece with a bit of levity. We're back in the Richelieu wing for Gabrielle d'Estrées et une de ses sœurs, or Gabrielle d'Estrées and one of her sisters. I'm not proud to admit that in my head, I've always called this painting the Nipple Sisters. You can see why. I wanted to put it in my YouTube thumbnail, but I didn't dare. I knew I'd be blocked. It was painted by an unknown artist in 1594, and it's thought to be the work of a painter from the Fontainebleau school. In this piece, Gabrielle d'Estrées, the beloved favorite mistress of King Henry IV of France, sits in the bath holding a ring, and her sister, Julienne Hippolyte Josephine, also in the bath, reaches over and pinches her right nipple. It's a curious painting that is confusing at best and downright incestuous at worst. But what does it mean? Well, since we don't know exactly who painted it, we don't actually know their intended meaning, but there are a few competing theories. The most traditional theory is that this nipple-tweaking gesture acts as a symbolic announcement that Gabrielle is pregnant with Henry's child, César de Bourbon, a theory bolstered by the seamstress sewing baby clothing here in the background. There is also a second version of the painting that shows César being fed by a wet nurse. A more modern interpretation is that the painting is actually meant to represent female homosexuality, even though the women depicted are sisters. And it's been used in ad campaigns and art pieces to represent lesbianism. However, it could be both. A painting for the king of the mother of his children, and also a titillating scene for him to enjoy. Regardless of the painter's intent, this is one of the most recognizable and parodied pieces of art in the Louvre, all the more mysterious due to the anonymity of the painter. Alright, we're back to very serious pieces. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio was violent, rude, and homicidal, and highly talented. He was a controversy magnet, demonstrated when his patron refused this painting for vulgarity. I mean, I used to think that Caravaggio was a bad boy, but then I realized he was just a bad man. Despite Caravaggio's toxic personal life, no one can deny his spectacular talent. He depicted everyone, saints and sinners alike, as rawly human and realistic. There are 3 Caravaggio works in the Louvre, but let's talk about this one, painted between 1601 and 1606, toward the end of his rather short life. The artist was known for using beggars and prostitutes as models, and that likely upset this patron, who was a Vatican lawyer, and the finished painting was considered unfit for display. After all, this scene is meant to show us the pious heavenly ascent of the Virgin Mary. But instead of the flawless blonde woman rising to the heavens that we are expecting to see, we see an ordinary woman lying in a dark room. In a demonstration of chiaroscuro, that's that contrast of light and dark, she's lit by an unknown source. Though she is a divine figure, as demonstrated by her pale halo, she is lifeless and undignified. Caravaggio wants us to know that we are all equal in death. She wears red rather than her typical blue, surrounded by mourning apostles wearing expressions of grief. The artist shows us a pivotal moment in Christianity, made as mundane as possible so we can all relate. Now, it's impossible to state just how shocking this would have been for a contemporary viewer. The painting was considered nearly sacrilegious. Thankfully, Peter Paul Rubens saw it, and he declared that it was one of Caravaggio's best works. This glowing review made the painting more desirable, and it was purchased by the Duke of Mantua before landing in the collection of Charles I of England, and eventually here in the Louvre. Make sure you also have a look at Caravaggio's work, The Fortune Teller, located just a few steps away. The Gallery Medici is filled with monumental paintings commissioned by Marie de Medici from the legendary painter and shrewd political operative Peter Paul Rubens. Just a reminder, Marie de Medici was King Henry IV's widow and King Louis XIII's mother, and she hailed from Florence's wealthy Medici banking family. And wait, does he look familiar? Well, he should. He's none other than the lover-boy king of the illicit fair with Gabrielle d'Estrées. Yes, this is the same King Henry IV. He married Marie de Medici just 1 year after Gabrielle's death, and we'll come back to this painting a little bit later on. This room in the Louvre was specially designed for these very canvases, which were initially displayed in 2 rooms in Luxembourg Palace. In this series of canvases, Rubens depicts pivotal episodes of the Queen's life, told chronologically while carefully skirting her many controversial episodes. In 1622, when Marie de Medici returned from an exile imposed upon her by her son, Rubens was a hugely sought-after painter in the court of the Archduke of Austria and his influential wife Isabella. Of course, Marie only wanted the best, so she wanted Rubens. He agreed to a breakneck deadline for the massive project, just 4 years, and completed them in time. He was known as a very commercial painter, and he had a large workshop of students helping him. The works were delivered just in time for the wedding celebration of Marie's daughter, Henrietta Maria, and Charles I of England. Rubens would go on to paint for Charles I, as well as many other royals across Europe, cementing his reputation as both a talented artist and also a skilled negotiator. I include a lot more about his life in my second National Gallery video, linked below. And just look at Rubens and his first wife Isabella here. They just look like the coolest hipster couple in all of East London. We can see his signature Baroque style, filled with bright colors, references to Roman and Greek mythology, and sensual human bodies in all of their curvy and robust glory. Let's have a closer look at one of the most celebrated paintings of the Medici cycle. Poor Rubens had a lot of work on his hands because even though she was rich and powerful, Marie's life just wasn't all that interesting. So here we have him sort of stretching out the narrative to make content for 24 paintings, not unlike a modern TikToker making what would be a short story into like 24 parts. Rubens elevates the rather mundane moments of her life by adding mythological elements, and none are more elaborate than the presentation of the portrait of Marie de Medici to King Henry IV. Here we see Henry gazing at her portrait for the first time with an awestruck expression. The portrait is being held by Cupid, who smiles mischievously, and Hymen, the god of marriage. Henry is flanked by the personification of France, urging him forward and reminding us just how good Marie will be for France. Zeus and Hera lovingly gaze down at the scene, giving it unparalleled historical blessing. And it was just my luck that the last 2 times I visited the Louvre, this gallery was closed for refurbishment. It will reopen in the summer of 2024. The collection includes 21 canvases, each 4 meters in height, which stacks up to an impressive 300 square meters of paintings. That's a lot to admire. The legendary Rembrandt Van Rijn is well represented at the Louvre, including some of his famous self-portraits. But this is a really unique painting, and the figure at its center is nearly life-sized. The work, entitled Bathsheba at her bath, completed in 1654, depicts an Old Testament story wherein Bathsheba bathes and an attendant dries her foot. This scene, which usually includes a young King David, is the subject of the much-covered song Hallelujah. As a Canadian, I can't decide whether I love the version by Leonard Cohen, Katie Lang, or Rufus Wainwright more. In the biblical story, in the book of Samuel, King David sees Bathsheba emerging from her bath and is instantly captivated by her beauty, even though she's married to a general. He sends a letter to call for her, and they go to bed, and she becomes pregnant. To marry her and conceal his adultery, David sends Bathsheba's husband Uriah the Hittite into battle, and his generals are ordered to abandon him, guaranteeing his death. The child is stillborn, and Bathsheba ultimately becomes an outcast. Most painters choose to depict David first seeing Bathsheba, but Rembrandt instead shows us Bathsheba making her harrowing choice, here with the letter in her hand. We can see the foreshadowing of the ultimate tragedy on her face. She's depicted as a natural woman rather than a mythical representation, every bit as complex and layered as Rembrandt himself was during his legendarily fraught life. Rembrandt is a master of light and shadow, never more apparent than in this arresting work. While he lavishes attention on her nude body, it is the psychology of the painting that makes it so compelling. I'm heading to Amsterdam soon, so let me know in the comment section if you'd like a video about the museums there, including the Rijksmuseum and the Rembrandt Museum. Also, make sure you look around this room here in the Richelieu wing of the Louvre. It's filled with many amazing pieces by the artist, including his iconic self-portraits, and this unusual piece called The Slaughtered Ox. I have plans for a macabre Louvre video, and this piece will definitely be on it, along with Headless Saint Denis, of course. Here we have The Lacemaker by Johannes Vermeer, completed in 1669. The enigmatic Vermeer lived a short life, leaving behind only 34 or 37, experts disagree, paintings of remarkable quality and distinct style. He's often known as the Sphinx of Delft because his methods are just that mysterious. Magician Teller of Penn and Teller even made a documentary about how he might have made his stylized yet realistic works. He was almost forgotten completely after his death, but he was rediscovered in the mid-19th century by German and French art journalists. Vermeer is known for his meticulous depictions of young women, likely modeled by his wife and daughters. Though his wife's family was quite well-to-do and gave him a lot of connections in his career as an art dealer and helped him secure a patron, the household didn't have that much money, and they had even less after an art market crash towards the end of his short life. Vermeer often depicts privileged views and quiet moments, scenes of domesticity that many other painters, such as contemporaries Rembrandt and Rubens, might have felt were beneath their talents. Now, I will admit that I used to not really get Vermeer. I thought his paintings were quite boring. However, upon learning more about his life and his technique, I now, rightfully, find him one of the most special painters in history. The Lacemaker is the smallest and most abstract of all his works, completed in 1669, around the same time and cut from the same bolt of canvas as a young woman seated at the virginal. In this painting, a young woman leans over a piece of lacework, hard at work on a painstaking task. Vermeer was a master of light and shadow. In this work, the subject is slightly out of focus, leading some experts to believe that Vermeer may have used a camera obscura to project the image onto canvas. However, this blurriness may have been done on purpose to suggest depth of field, which was also highly unusual at this point in art history. Tragically, Vermeer would die just a few years later, leaving his wife and 11 children in abject poverty. Today, at the Louvre, we can give him all the credit he deserved in his lifetime. This is the only Vermeer here at this museum. There are only so many to go around. Elizabeth Louise Vigée-Lebrun is a rarity in the history of 18th century painting. She is a woman, and she was good enough to get into the Academy. While men like David were painting grand historical scenes or neoclassical myths, Vigée-Lebrun was so successful because she tapped into maternal love, particularly when painting children, and she was the official court painter of Marie Antoinette. Now, not everyone is so glowing about Lebrun's intentions. After all, she often used her self-portraits, including many with her daughter Julie, as a calling card or advertisement of her skills, and Simone de Beauvoir will later accuse her of narcissistically, quote, never tiring of putting her smiling maternity on her canvases. But I choose to see this painting in a less cynical light and embrace the tenderness between mother and child. You can truly see the affection between mother and daughter, providing a sense of authenticity into the French aristocratic world that was very much portrayed as one of artifice and opulence. Their bodies here are merged together, forming a single pyramid shape that mirrors so many Renaissance paintings of the Virgin and Child, and you can really see that they're delighting in each other's presence. As she often did, Lebrun uses her attire to cement her place in artistic history. She is dressed in the clothing reminiscent of ancient Greece here, in a style known as à la grecque, taking her place amongst the classics. Her hair is loose and tousled, just as it is in her self-portrait at the National Gallery in London. In that painting, she asserts herself as an artist with her paints on display, but here she is both artist and mother. This was painted in 1789, the year of the French Revolution, and Marie Antoinette will be beheaded just a few years later. Elizabeth and Julie will flee France and travel the continent for more than a decade, during which time her remarkable talent would support their rather bohemian lifestyle. By the way, this painting caused a minor scandal at the Salon of 1787 when the first version was displayed. The crime? No, not that exposed shoulder, but her exposed teeth! An open-mouthed smile was considered base and tasteless, with no precedent in antiquity. Oh, the scandal! If you love Vigée-Lebrun like I do, be sure to have a look at her other work here at the Louvre. In room 933, you'll find Peace Bringing Back Abundance, which was her submission to the Academy upon her admission there. I'm so thrilled to be able to do something quite rare in the Louvre and in art galleries and museums in general, and that is show you two paintings by women back to back. With more than 5,500 paintings in the collection by more than 1,400 artists, only 22 female painters are represented, including Marie-Guillemine Benoist, a student of both Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun and Jacques-Louis David, who we'll talk about very soon. Benoist painted this work and displayed it at the Salon in the year 1800, where it caused quite a stir. You can see it hanging on the wall there. It is thought to depict a formerly enslaved woman named Madeleine from Guadeloupe, who was brought to Paris by Benoist's brother to work as a domestic. This painting was completed in the short window between 1794 and 1802, when slavery was abolished in the French colonies before it was reinstated by Napoleon. Benoist treats Madeleine with the dignity and grace usually only afforded to white sitters, part of a broader trend to portray African subjects as heroic and valiant in this brief period of abolition, and also later as a way to agitate for abolition a second time. Just like the à la grecque clothing worn by Vigée-Lebrun, Madeleine's clothing recalls classical antiquity and the fashionable muslin dresses of the period, but it also evokes Caribbean slave attire. Her pose is similar to those seen in Benoist's teacher David's portraits, such as this one, located in room 714 of the Denon wing. It's also similar to what she wore herself in this self-portrait a few years later. However, Madeleine's bared breast would have been unusual for portrait painting, and it does suggest an allegory or mythical subject, or possibly alludes to the slave trade. The colors, red, blue, white, parallel the colors of the French Revolutionary Tricolore flag adopted in 1789, and may suggest that Benoist is making an allusion to Marianne, the female personification of liberty and of France itself, who will explore in Liberty Leading the People, who also has a bared breast. While these are charitable interpretations, others criticize Benoist for exploiting an anonymous black woman to build her name in the art world. We do know that she kept this painting in her private studio until her death in 1826, so it clearly had an impact on her, just as it does on us. Our next massive painting shows us the coronation of Napoleon, which occurred in Notre Dame Cathedral. Napoleon had led several victorious military campaigns in Egypt and Italy, and was crowned leader of the French Empire on December 2nd, 1804. He managed to persuade Pope Pius VII, who rarely traveled, to come to Paris from Rome and give him his blessing. Napoleon was all about trying to evoke the previous grandeur of Charlemagne's coronation 1,000 years earlier. Painter Jacques-Louis David did not have a ton of artistic leeway here. Napoleon was a stickler about the details about this painting, and he dictated precisely who should be in it and where they should be situated. Therefore, this isn't an exact depiction of the event, but rather an idealized version of what Napoleon wanted to have happened. For instance, though his mother, Letizia Bonaparte, is depicted prominently, she was actually against the coronation and she didn't attend. His brother, who also did not attend, is in the painting too. On the day, Napoleon grabbed the crown from the Pope and placed it on his own head, which was considered rude, to say the least. This removed the symbolic approval that God was placing the crown on his head, and it humiliated the Pope. Afterward, he probably realized that this moment had not painted him, no pun intended, in the best light. So he has David, who was the preeminent neoclassicist painter of the day, portray him placing the crown of Empress Josephine's head, a much more courteous and gracious gesture than his previous grabby hands. Josephine's also painted significantly younger than she was. She's 41 here, which I do think is quite young, to be fair. The painting was a huge success, and Napoleon loved it. He said, "It is not a painting. There are people walking in this picture. Life is everywhere. David, I salute you. You have made me a French knight." Wow, high praise. Now, David is a big gun here at the Louvre. His works line the halls of the so-called Red Rooms here in the Denon wing, alongside the massive French canvases, also of the neoclassical age. Make sure you have a look at Madame Récamier and The Oath of the Horatii. You'll also find some of his smaller canvases in the Sully wing, along with other works by the next artist that we're speaking about, Jean-Auguste-Dominique Ingres. Ingres was the prized student of David and a titan of academic art, that is, art approved by the Parisian Académie des Beaux-Arts, but he always did things slightly different than the norm. This painting was commissioned by Queen Caroline Murat of Naples, Napoleon's sister, so he had to impress, and impress he did. The painting depicts an Odalisque, a term for a chambermaid who lives alongside the wives and concubines of an Ottoman sultan. Of course, Ingres is influenced by a very Western idea of what would happen in a sultan's harem. He's envisioning steamy sexcapades and lithe beauty also here in this canvas, while the reality was more about wives working together to raise many children. Think more Sister Wives and less Prince Video. Now, nudes at this time in France were very popular, but they should ideally be made safe, with some temporal distance. That is, they should depict classical figures from Greek and Roman antiquity, and not contemporary people. However, while Ingres' Odalisque may not be set in a distant past, she is distanced by geography. She's all the way over in the Ottoman Empire. She's surrounded by the sensuous silks and jewels of a very rich and exotic household, as well as her peacock feathered fan. For this work, Ingres was inspired by the Dresden Venus by Giorgione and Titian's Venus of Urbino, but he added his own flair and style. For instance, he extended the woman's proportions to make the whole thing less tied to anatomical realism. Her back has been described as having 3 vertebrae too many. I mean, just look at her impossible figure. Instantly recognizable, this painting shows us Ingres' movement from neoclassicism towards the more exotic romanticism that would define his later career. Romanticism is more about your emotions and subjectivity, while neoclassicism should be, it says, objective. Ingres' creativity would inspire the Impressionists and the Modernists, such as Picasso and Matisse. Make sure you also have a look at his Oedipus and the Sphinx here in the Red Rooms, and the Valpinçon Bather in the Sully Wing, just to name a few of the more than 50 canvases by him here. Honestly, if you only see one painting in the Louvre, I think it should be the Raft of the Medusa by Théodore Gericault. He details the devastating aftermath of a shipwreck on July 2nd, 1816. The crew was shipwrecked off the coast of what is now Mauritania in northwest Africa. 147 men had been aboard the Medusa, and they quickly constructed a raft. However, within 13 days, all but 15 of the men would die. They suffered from extreme dehydration and survived murder and cannibalism. Gericault interviewed 2 survivors of the horror, and he even asked them to reenact their traumatic experiences. The chilling painting depicts the horrific moment when a French military ship passed by the raft but neglected to save the men. This moment, as well as the incompetence of the Medusa's captain, became an international scandal. In the painting, everyone, no matter their rank, is reduced down to their most base human form, wearing shreds of clothing destroyed by the elements. The men are one gasping organism, all huddled together as one unlikely community where class and even race does not matter at first glance, because yes, shockingly for 200 years ago, the protagonist of this painting is a black man. Here he is at the apex, waving a red flag at the approaching rescue vessel. It was important to Gericault that he get his African protagonist right. He spent a lot of time creating studies of a man called Joseph as he prepared to paint the scene, and make it as historically accurate as possible. However, a deeper reading intended by the abolitionist Gericault, which would have been understood by contemporary French viewers at the 1819 Salon, and here you can see the painting on display there, is that this macabre human pyramid represents France's empire, built on the backs of enslaved African men. The incident was fresh in the minds of the public who attended the salon, and this painting polarized the crowd. It was the talk of the show, whether you loved it or hated it. Some said it was, quote, a pile of corpses, and was too horrible and realistic to be displayed on canvas, while others felt it captured the tragedy in a new and modern way. Gericault intended the painting to be controversial, and he was disappointed it wasn't selected for display in the Louvre. Instead, the painting found fame in London, where it was hung lower than it had been in Paris, allowing viewers to appreciate its details. When Gericault died just a few years later, at the young age of 32, the Louvre's curator purchased the painting, and it now dominates room 702. Please don't miss it. You might recognize this one. It's Liberty Leading the People by Eugène Delacroix. Along with Gericault, he is considered the greatest French Romantic painter, and he had a legendary rivalry with Ingres owing to the differences in their techniques. Delacroix did some pretty experimental things, but no painting exemplifies his style and vision like this one, which depicts an allegory of the 1830 French Revolution, which toppled King Charles X. It's not depicting the 1789 French Revolution, which is a common mistake. Here, Liberty is shown as the bare-breasted centerpiece, and she's holding the French flag, known as le tricolore, which the militia had worn when they stormed the Bastille. Before this,